Alright guys, how's it going? Today I'll be showcasing a set of cars that were planned to appear in Gran Turismo 2, but sadly never made it into the game. In fact, these cars were barely started at all. Most of them only appear as text strings on the demos, while some had logos created for them as well. But before we dive in, I need to give a big thanks to Submaniac93 and Super Fritzio, who massively helped out with this video by providing information, codes, photos and more. Thanks guys, this video wouldn't have been possible without you. Also, my YouTube membership is now officially available. If you join, you can get monthly access to save games for Gran Turismo that you can download, which contain prize cars, special models, cut cars and more. I'll also be doing giveaways of awesome rare Gran Turismo stuff every month, as well as more perks which I'm currently working on. Anyway, let's start with several European cars that didn't make it into Gran Turismo 2. First up we have the Renault Sport Spider. Again, as a reminder, this car, like most others we're going to see, only exists as a text string on the demo discs of Gran Turismo 2. With most cars we're going to be looking at, their bodies are Toyota Altezzas, which were used by the game's developers as placeholders, until it could be swapped out when the car's actual body was finished. But obviously in most cases here, it never was. Also, many of these cars have no logos, so again a placeholder is used. This time it's some Japanese text. Although it might not have a body, we can look at what the real-life Renault Sport Spider looked like, which allows us to imagine what it might have looked like within the game. The Renault Spider was built in the mid-90s as a car to promote the manufacturer as a sporting brand. There was this road version built, and also as a racing version for a one-make race that ran as a support series to the British Touring Car Championship between 1995 and 1999, and would feature two future touring car champions, Jason Plato and Andy Priaulx, who won the UK Spider Cup in 1995 and 1999 respectively. As you'll notice with the text string, the car was intended to be racing modified, which means that it could have looked like any of the Renault Spiders that appeared in the Spider Cup. Perhaps it would have been inspired by either Plato's or Priaulx's cars. If you do want to drive the Renault Sport Spider, you can do so in other games such as Project Gotham Racing 2, EOS Exhibition of Speed, and a game called Roadsters which came out in 1999, the same year as Gran Turismo 2. However, to my knowledge, the racing Renault Sport Spider would never appear in a video game, just the road version. Keeping with the theme of UK racing, let's discuss two cut Peugeot cars. The first is the Peugeot 406 Toka touring car. Again, it exists as a text string on Gran Turismo 2 demos, but unlike the Renault Spider, it wasn't completely cut from the game. Instead, it may be the case that they weren't able to obtain the license required to give this car a spot in the game, so it was actually downgraded to a racing modification for the Peugeot 406 sedan. For licensing reasons, the car displayed Esso logos on the PAL version and Exxon logos on the NTSC version of the game. The Peugeot team ran this livery in the British Touring Car Championship from 1997 to 1998. In its first season, drivers Tim Harvey and Patrick Watts placed 9th and 16th in the championship, and the team placed 6th in the Constructors' Championship. Watts was replaced by Kiwi driver Paul Radicic for 1998, but the team wouldn't really fare any better in the championship. Radicic would finish 14th and Harvey would finish 17th in the championship, with Peugeot placing last in the Manufacturers' Championship. The team's highlight was 2 second places for Tim Harvey in 1997. The car was licensed to appear in Toka Touring Car Championship in 1997 and also in the sequel Toka 2 Touring Cars in 1998, so give either of those games a try if you want to drive the official licensed 406 touring car. However, the version that we did get on Gran Turismo 2 as the racing modification for the Peugeot 406 sedan is still pretty close to the real thing. The next cut Peugeot is the racing modified Peugeot 406 3-litre V6 Coupe. In the final game, the standard 406 Coupe existed, but its racing modification was never finished. Therefore, we can only speculate about what it might have looked like on Gran Turismo 2. The Peugeot 406 Coupe wouldn't appear in the British Touring Car Championship until 2001, 2 years after Gran Turismo 2's release. So maybe this racing modification would have been inspired by another 406 sedan from years previous. Prior to the green and gold livery we saw just before, the Peugeot team ran a Total-inspired car in the 1996 season, with drivers Tim Harvey and Patrick Watts placing 15th and 16th in the Drivers' Championship. Now we move on to the Jaguar XJR15 GT race car. This car does exist on the final build of the game, but had a planned racing modification that was cut. On the Gran Turismo 2 demos, it shares the same model as the unmodified XJR15, but it's a slightly darker shade of green. We can, however, hazard a good guess at what the racing modification might have looked like, as the XJR15 race car did exist in real life. Wikipedia states that, according to a press release by Jaguar Sport, a limited number of XJR15s were built specifically to compete in the 1991 Jaguar Sport Intercontinental Challenge, a 3-race competition held throughout the year as a support event for the 1991 Formula 1 Grand Prix at Monaco, Silverstone and Spa-Francorchamps. Derek Warwick won at Monaco, Juan Manuel Fangio II at Silverstone and Armin Harner at Spa. The car's racing modification would have likely been inspired by one of these race cars. Which one it was, we may never know. However, all the XJR15s in the series did look relatively similar, so at least we can get a pretty good idea of what the car was originally intended to look like. Next we move on to another cut Jaguar, the XK180. This car was completely cut from Gran Turismo 2, but again exists as a text string on the demos of the game. However, it is also mentioned in the license credits on the final version of Gran Turismo 2, which is again another indicator of its planned appearance on the game. The Jaguar XK180 was a concept car created to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the XK car, and to show the world the skills of Jaguar stylists, craftsmen and engineers. It was presented at the Paris Motor Show in 1998. The Jaguar XK180 did appear on one video game, however, Test Drive 6, which was released a year earlier than GT2. So if you're eager to try it out, jump onto Test Drive 6 and take it for a spin. Interestingly, Test Drive 6 had a couple of cars of its own that only exist as text strings. The first is a Panos AIV Roadster. However, the Panos Esperante did make it into Test Drive 6. In real life, the AIV Roadster looked like this. The second is a TVR Tuscan, which did exist on Gran Turismo 2. 3 other TVRs are present on Test Drive 6 though, the Griffith, the Cerbera and the Speed 12. In real life, the car looked like this. And then there was the BMW V12 LMR, which was only playable on the PAL PS1 version of the game. It wasn't available on the NTSC PS1 version, and it was totally cut from the PC version of the game, though the car's textures still remain in the game files. But the car did appear on Gran Turismo 4 of course. And then there were the Pitbull 1 and Pitbull 2 text strings, which were allegedly 2 cut motorbikes. Funnily enough, the game Test Drive Cycles was going to see a PS1 release, but was cancelled. Gran Turismo did successfully release a motorbike spin-off named Taurus Trophy on PS2 however. Well, I guess that brings us full circle. Moving on to the Rover Mini 1.3 Euro edition. There was both a normal version and a racing modification for this car planned in, however both would be cut. On the demo discs, the normal version of the car does have a body, however this is simply a duplicate of the Rover Mini 1.3 and is therefore a placeholder. The body of the racing modified version doesn't exist, though there are racing modifications for the other Mini models on the final version of the game, which we can look at to determine how the Mini 1.3 Euro edition may have looked. As for the standard car's appearance, maybe it took inspiration from the other Minis out there in real life, and maybe the racing modification would have also been different to those of the other Minis. We may never know what was originally planned. Now we come to a series of cut roof cars. And yes, I believe that is actually the correct pronunciation. I actually spent years thinking it was RUF due to all the letters being capitalised, but apparently it is roof. And as you'll likely know, having roof in the game was a way of allowing players to drive Porsches without actually licensing any Porsche cars. The cut cars in question are all based on the Porsche 993 and were all cut racing modifications planned for the roof cars. They are the racing modified Roof BTR2, Roof BTR4, Roof CTR2, Roof Turbo R and Roof CTR. The BTR2, CTR2, Turbo R and CTR all exist in the final game, at least in their standard unmodified forms. The racing modified versions seen on the demo builds were all cut. The Roof BTR4 is a slightly different story, however. Both the unmodified and racing modified versions of this car were removed. The standard BTR4 still exists in part though. Its name and logo exist, while the body is a placeholder. There are 3 other roofs that exist in this state too on the final build of the game. They are the CR4, the BR2 and the BR4. Like the BTR4, they all have their own logos, but their bodies are simply placeholders. Interestingly, in the case of the Roof CTR's racing modification, which was cut, its name was also changed in the final game to the Roof CTR Yellowbird, which was an affectionate nickname given to the CTR by Road and Track magazine due to its stark yellow paint scheme set against the overcast sky on the day of their photo shoot. We can only guess at what these racing modifications might have looked like, though maybe the game designers would have used this as an opportunity to sneak a few real-life racing Porsches into the game, with various changes made for licensing reasons of course. I especially like this example of a Porsche 911 GT2 sponsored by PlayStation, which ran at Le Mans in 1998 and was entered by the Société Chariot team. It was driven by Jean-Pierre Jarier, Carl Rosenblatt, and Robin Donovan, but unfortunately failed to finish. Of course, they weren't the only tech-string cars to appear on the final build of Gran Turismo 2. There was the Castrol Mugen Accord, of which only its logo remains. It seems like the game designers wanted to license the real-life Castrol Mugen Accord from JTCC in 1996, but once again had to settle for it being downgraded to the racing modification of the Accord Sedan 96, which returns from Gran Turismo 1. Although I was always gutted that you couldn't add green wheels to the car to make it more like the real-life version. The car was licensed to appear in Advan Racing, however, so take it out for a test drive on that game if you want to drive the real thing. There was also the Rex Supercharger VX, which was a cut Subaru car, and has the now familiar placeholder of a Toyota Altezza body. It also appears on the licensing credits too, suggesting it was cut quite late on in development. In real life, the Rex was in production from 1972 to 1992, and it was the 3rd generation Rex that brought us the Supercharger VX version. It was released in 1988 in response to the successes of the Suzuki Alto Works and the Daihatsu Mira. Despite being turbocharged, it still only put out about 54 horsepower, so don't worry guys, we didn't really miss out on too much with this one. Next we have a cut racing modification for the Dodge Stratus ES. Like several others, this is a case of a car that existed on the final build of Gran Turismo 2, but only in its standard unmodified form. Its racing modification was cut entirely. We are able to say what the racing modification might have looked like, as a Dodge Stratus touring car was seen across the 1996 and 1997 North American Touring Car Championships. The PacWest Touring Car Group entered 2 Stratuses in 1996, driven by Dominic Dobson and David Donohue to 2nd and 3rd place in the Drivers' Championship, while Dodge also finished 2nd in the Manufacturers' Championship. In 1997, Donohue won the Drivers' Championship, with Dobson finishing 4th, but Dodge again finished 2nd to Honda in the Manufacturers' Championship. Now we come to a car which may be a bit more familiar to the Gran Turismo fans out there, the Ford Escort 1.8 GTI. The reason why it's a bit more well known is that there was an image of the car in the Ford dealership on Gran Turismo mode on the Gran Turismo 2 demos. However, it was only an image, as the player was prohibited from clicking on the car to view the in-game model. And that's because the model was never made. Yes, for whatever reason, the car only existed as a tech string, which again we can see if we modify the first car in the home garage on arcade mode. Alike to several other cars, a logo for the Escort was created as well, which you can see here. Sadly though, the model was never built as we said, but we can lean on real-life images of the Escort GTI to see what it might have looked like. The 6th generation Ford Escort did appear across many racing games, though most naturally favoured the Escort RS Cosworth rather than the GTI. However, there was another lesser known Ford Escort planned to appear on Gran Turismo 2 as well. The Escort RS 2000 also existed as a tech string on the demos of GT2. However, it's also referenced in the Ford RS200's description on the final build of the game. The Escort RS 2000 was originally built by Ford in 1972 as an upgrade to the RS 1600. Next up we have two cut BMWs, the 320i Coupe and the 323i Coupe. Starting with the 320i, only the name exists for this one, and the body of the standard and racing modified versions of the car are simply Toyota Altezza placeholders. The 323i is slightly more curious, with a body existing for the standard unmodified version, which seems similar but not exactly the same as the other BMW 3 Series present on the game. Its racing modification, like the 320i, is simply a placeholder. Both the 320i and the 323i were cut from the final game, however the 320ci and 323ci still both remain, with racing modification options as well. Perhaps these racing modifications would have been shared by the 320i and 320ci. We may never know how they were intended to appear, however. The BMW 320i touring car would go on to appear in Gran Turismo 4, so if you want to drive a racing modified 320i, this is the place to do it. Staying with German manufacturers, now we move on to Mercedes-Benz, starting with the Mercedes-Benz AMG C55. While the AMG C55 may have been cut, the AMG C43 still remains in the final game. The AMG C43 was released in late 1997 with a 4.3 litre V8 which output 306 brake horsepower. The C55 AMG was released in 1998 and was essentially an upgrade to the C43 which came before it. It had a 5.4 litre engine which output 342 brake horsepower and could achieve a top speed of 155 miles per hour. Speaking of the Mercedes-Benz, most people are aware that the Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR was intended to appear in the game and was pictured in very early pre-release screenshots, both with blue and yellow wing mirrors. However, the cutting room floor also states that a road version was shown in a sticker of a preview disc. No photo evidence of this seems to have surfaced online, at least to my knowledge, but what this suggests is that you could originally buy the CLK GTR road version and then apply racing modifications to turn it into the race car. There are cars that work in a similar way on the final game, such as the Lister Storm and the Jaguar XJ220. At one point in the game's development, the Ford GT40 would have also worked in this way. The player purchases the standard GT40 and then applies the racing modifications to transform it into the GT40 race car. In fact, the racing modification for the GT40 still exists in the game's files, though it's of course identical to that of the GT40 race car. You may know that there's also the GT40 Mark III, which again shares the same body, but with a glitchy back end. In reality, the Mark III was a road-only car, and in real life, it looked like this. If you wanted to drive the Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR road car, you can do so on Need for Speed High Stakes, which is also called Need for Speed Road Challenge in Europe. It's great to drive it, though also a little sad at the same time, as it serves as a reminder that EA's licensing agreement with Mercedes is often thought to be the reason why the car was cut from Gran Turismo 2. Interestingly, there was also a cut racing modification for the CLK GTR in NFS High Stakes, though it was not inspired by the real-life CLK GTR race car. The CLK GTR race car would finally appear on Gran Turismo 4, however not in the exact same livery as the one that appeared in those infamous pre-release screenshots of Gran Turismo 2. As most players are aware, GT2's game designers also created an original Mercedes-Benz special model for the game, the Mercedes CLK race car, which allegedly also failed to get Mercedes' seal of approval to appear in Gran Turismo 2. Lastly, there's also the C-Class touring car, which exists in the final build of Gran Turismo 2 as another tech-string-only car. Oddly though, it uses a racing-modified Nissan Primera as a placeholder, rather than the Toyota Altezza like most others. This car would have likely been based on the 1994 or 1995 Mercedes C-Class touring car, with Klaus Ludwig winning the DTM title in the C-Class touring car in 1994. Bernd Schneider and Dario Franchitti raced for the D2 AMG Mercedes team in 1995, with Schneider winning the Drivers' Championship and Mercedes-Benz winning the Manufacturers' Championship too. Sticking with Germany, we move on to three cut Volkswagen cars. The first of these is the VW Golf TDI. Both the tech string and the car's logo exist on the demo discs, however the body is once again a placeholder. There are already 4 Volkswagen Golfs that appear on the final game, which are the Golf 2.3 V5, the Golf V6 and the Golf GTI 1.8T, and the Golf GTI. However, the TDI would have differed from these other Golfs as it would have been the only diesel model in the game, with TDI standing for Turbocharged Direct Injection, basically a turbo diesel model. Unlike the other VW Golfs, however, this model does not have a racing modification, at least in this stage of the game's development. There was also an unused logo for the Volkswagen Golf Cabriolet found in the game's files. This would have been a cabriolet version of the Mark IV Golf as far as we know. However, as we do know, there are actually no cabriolets in the final game. Perhaps there were eventually going to be some cars with their interiors modelled in Gran Turismo 2, but as we know, none of these cars eventually made the cut. As most will know, the VW Polo 1.4 was cut from Gran Turismo 2 quite late on, with the model still being present in the final game, though the player cannot obtain it without the use of cheat codes, similar to the Mercedes-Benz CLK race car. However, there was also another VW Polo planned to appear in Gran Turismo 2. This was an earlier Polo, the G40, which was produced during the Mark I and Mark II Polo's lifespan. Both the name of the car and logo appear on the demos of the game, however, I'm not sure whether it's going to be the original Mark I Polo G40, or the slightly newer Mark II Polo G40 which was going to grace our gaming consoles. Maybe we'll never know for sure. Moving on, the last of the trio of cut Volkswagens was the Beetle 1.9. Interestingly, this Beetle is also misspelled here on the test drive demo disc. It's spelled with an A instead of a second E. Although other cars' names were misspelled too, even on the final build of the game, such as the Zenavi Silvia being spelled with a Z instead of an X. There is only one normal road-going VW Beetle available to buy from the VW dealership on the final game, which is simply called the Volkswagen New Beetle. There is also the New Beetle GT, however, which is available to buy from the special models area of the dealership too. If we jump back to the demo disc for just a second, we can also see that the Beetle 1.9 would have had a racing modification if it was ever finished. We can, however, look at the racing modification for the one Beetle that did make it into Gran Turismo 2 for an indication of how it might have looked. Or perhaps it would have had a different look altogether. Again, this is a question we may never know the answer to. Moving south to Italy, we now come to two cut Pagani Zondas. Yes, that's right, the cars that would eventually make their debuts on Gran Turismo 3 were originally going to appear a game earlier on Gran Turismo 2. The two Zondas that would have appeared were the C12 and the C12S. Both of these specific models would appear on Gran Turismo 3, along with the Pagani Zonda LM race car. The text strings on the GT2 demos indicate that no racing modifications were planned for either the C12 or the C12S, so the player would have had to make do with the two standard models. The Zonda C12 originally debuted at the 1999 Geneva Motor Show and was powered by a 6-litre Mercedes-Benz V12, which output 444 horsepower. The C12S built on these foundations, and AMG tuned the engine to output 542 brake horsepower, just shy of 100 more than the original C12. Heading up north to Great Britain, we now come to the cut Lotus Elise Trofeo. Only the car's name exists on the Gran Turismo 2 demos, no logo. Looking online, there are actually very few pictures of this car available, though it seems that it was going to be a road-going Elise that looks pretty much ready to take to the track. On the final build of GT2, there were tons of Lotus Elises, leading me to think that the Trofeo was possibly one too many Elises to make the cut. There's the Elise 111S, the Elise 135, the Elise 190, the Elise, and of course the Motorsport Elise, and the Elise GT1 as well. We can also see that the Elise Trofeo would have had a racing modification option as well. All but one Elise on the final game have racing modification options, with the exception being the Motorsport Elise, which is practically a race car anyway. All these Elise racing modifications look pretty much the same, though they all have their specific names on the front and also on the sides. This could give us some kind of indication as to how the Elise Trofeo's racing modification may have looked, but there are also real-life racing Elises which could have also been the inspiration for the in-game Trofeo. What's particularly interesting about the Elise Trofeo is that it seems to have an open top, i.e. no roof. As we all know, like the Golf Cabriolet, there are no cars that show their interiors on Gran Turismo 2. That would come later in the series. The closest Elise that does kind of exist is the cut soft top Elise, which was available on the Gran Turismo 2 demos before it was later cut. It still remains in the game's code on the final version, but it's only accessible with cheat codes. Popping over to Japan now, we have two cut Tomi Kaira racing modifications to discuss, and they are for the ZZ2 and ZZ3. Dealing with the ZZ2 first, on the final game, the car does have the R prefix, which denotes a car that is racing modified, even though the car actually lacks any vinyls, decals, sponsors or anything. It's not the only car to state that it's racing modified when it actually isn't though, as both the S2000 GT1 and Toyota Altezza LM Edition are the same, to name two examples anyway. On the demos of Gran Turismo 2, the car has both an unmodified and a racing modified tech string, indicating that there would have been a separate racing modified version of the car which was also cut. The ZZ3 also had a racing modification planned, as evidenced by the tech string on the test drive demo disc. Unlike the ZZ2, the ZZ3 existed purely as an unmodified car on the final version of the game. The racing modification for the car was simply cut. Next we have another completely cut car, the S14 Silvia GT2. With a rather generic name and no model to guide us, we can only speculate about what this car might have looked like. Although, with the return of several LM Edition cars from the original Gran Turismo, including the GTO LM Edition and the FTO LM Edition, maybe we were going to see the return of the Nissan Silvia LM Edition, now called the Silvia GT2. The red colour scheme of the car was based on the Person Silvia, which ran in JGTC in the 90s. The green colour scheme was most likely made up. Alternatively, perhaps we were going to see another Silvia from JGTC, in addition to the Daishin and Zanardi Silvias we got to drive on GT2. One of the most notable JGTC Silvias we never got to drive on Gran Turismo 2 was the Bando Racing Nissan Silvia from 1997. It was driven by Hideo Fukuyama and Max Orido to overall victory in the GT300 class. There's an unlicensed version of this car that appears on Advan Racing on the PS1, while the actual car was licensed on JGTC, All Japan Grand Touring Car Championship. Staying in Japan, we hop over to Daihatsu to discuss three cut cars. The first of these is the Opti Aerodan Beaks 4-wheel drive. The car itself does exist on the final game, but the racing modification for the car was cut. Again, it exists solely as a tech string on the demo builds of Gran Turismo 2. It's difficult to say what it might have looked like, given that it's not a traditional race car. However, some other Daihatsu cars take inspiration from the Syrian rally car, otherwise known as the Storia rally car. Maybe this is the best guide we have to say what it might have looked like, if it was ever finished. The next Daihatsu was completely cut from the game, both the normal road version and a planned race modification. The car is the Mira TX 2-wheel drive 97. Taking the normal version first, we can see that it even had a logo created for it, but the body is an Altezza placeholder once again. The racing modified version is much the same, sadly. Now you might recognise this car on Gran Turismo 2, as the Mira TX 4-wheel drive did make it into the final build. As the 2-wheel drive version would have practically been the same in appearance, we can actually get a good idea of what both the standard version and the racing modified version of the car would have probably looked like. Next on our list is the Toyota XYR Detroit Show version, the racing modified XYR to be exact. On the final game, the XYR does exist, but only in standard form. Its racing modification was completely removed. As its name suggests, the XYR was shown to the world at the Detroit Motor Show in 1999, and is essentially a concept car for the 7th generation Toyota Celica. Fortunately, there are other Celicas present on the game, and they all have racing modifications. They are most likely inspired by the Wedge Celica, which took part in JGTC in 1999 in the GT300 class, and of course also existed on Gran Turismo 2. It could be the case that the XYR would have looked similar to this, since it's the only Celica in race trim to appear on the game, besides the Celica rally car, which was likely inspired by other Toyota rally cars around the same time. Staying with Toyota, we now come to the cut racing modification for the GT198. On Gran Turismo 2, there exists a road version of the GT198 and a race version, one with an SO livery on the PAL version of the game and one with an XO logo on the NTSC version of the game. However, it wasn't originally going to be this way. Similar to the examples we used earlier, like the Lister Storm and the XJ220, both of which essentially turn into race cars once they're racing modified. The GT198 was originally going to work in a similar fashion, whereby the race car was originally going to be the racing modification for the road car. On the GT2 demos, it actually has some kind of body, a very early, partially built version of it anyway. There was also another cut GT1, the GT1 Road version 99. On the final build, only the 98 Road version exists, despite there being the race car variants of both the 98 and 99 GT1. Perhaps the 99 road car was cut because it was pretty much identical to the 98 version. We may never know exactly how it would appear on the game, as only the text string remains for the car, but we can at least admire how the car looks in real life. Next up is the last cut car from Toyota. For now. Similar to the XYR Detroit Show version, the MRS Tokyo Motor Show version was originally going to have a racing modification as well, which is referenced by the text string on the Gran Turismo 2 demos once again. The MRS Tokyo Motor Show version on GT2 was based on the concept car's first appearance, as the name suggests, at the 1997 Tokyo Motor Show. This car would go into production as the third generation Toyota MR2 in December 1999. As for the cut racing modification, again we can look at one of the other third generation MR2s on the game for an indication of how it might have looked. The MR2, still called MRS in Japan by the way, had a burgundy coloured racing mod, with two colour schemes which only differ slightly from one another. Now we come to the most exciting text string only cars on the Gran Turismo 2 demo discs. First we have the J-Lock Diablo GTR 97. Yes, that's right, there was originally going to be a Lamborghini Diablo on Gran Turismo 2. And here's how the car looked in real life. It was driven by Taka Wada and Hisashi Wada in the GT500 class in the 1997 season of JGTC, but sadly it wasn't particularly competitive as it struggled to compete with the established Nissan Skylines, Honda NSXs and Toyota Supras in the GT500 class. Despite being cut from Gran Turismo 2, you can actually drive it on the official JGTC game for the PS1, which was released in 1998, but was based on the 1997 JGTC season. There was also an unlicensed version of the car present on Advan Racing, which was also released on the PS1, only in Japan, in 1998. However, that's not the only Diablo that was originally planned to appear on Gran Turismo 2. There was the J-Lock Diablo GT1 99. For some reason the 98 isn't present, just the 97 and 99 versions. As the name suggests, the Diablo was driven during the 1999 JGTC season, this time featuring the partnership of Hisashi Wada and Naohiro Furuya. Sadly, the car was once again a bit of a backmarker, and for this reason, there are so few photos of it available online. Interestingly, Gran Turismo's creators tried to place the Lamborghini Diablo from JGTC in Gran Turismo 3 also, and they succeeded. Kind of. The Nomad Diablo from the 2000 JGTC season appeared in Gran Turismo 3, but only in the Japanese version of the game. However, it would eventually become available to all players on Gran Turismo 5 and 6. Completing the trio of cut Lamborghini Diablos is the Rain X Diablo DL98. In real life, it was driven by Masami Sugiyama and Taka Wada during the 1998 JGTC season. Like the J-Lock Diablos, the car unfortunately could not compete with Japanese thoroughbreds, and sadly, it didn't have the most successful season. Sticking with the JGTC cars, we now turn our attention to two cut Ferraris. Yes, that's right, the creators of Gran Turismo originally tried to license two Ferrari cars way back in 1999. And it would take a further 7 years for us to actually see a Ferrari in a Gran Turismo game, which was Gran Turismo HD Concept in December 2006. Although GT HD was a Japan-only release, so most of us would have to wait another year for Gran Turismo 5 Prologue to be released to get our first taste of Ferrari in a Gran Turismo game. Returning to Gran Turismo 2, the first of two cut Ferraris was the Team FCJ Ferrari number 2897. It competed in the 1997 season of JGTC in the GT300 class, and drivers Tetsuya Ota and Anders Olofsson finished 7th and 9th respectively in GT300. Unlike to the J-Lock Diablo 97, the car can be driven on JGTC All Japan Grand Touring Car Championship, so while it might have been cut from GT2, we can at least enjoy driving it on another PS1 title. Similar to some of the other cars we've seen, there's an unlicensed version of the car on Advan Racing, however it's still pretty close to the real thing. The team's entry for the 1998 JGTC season was also planned to appear on Gran Turismo 2, but alike to the 97 Ferrari, the Team FCJ Ferrari F355 GT98 was also cut, but remained solely as a text string on the Gran Turismo 2 demo discs. Sadly, the team couldn't repeat its decent performance in the 1997 season, as both Tetsuya Ota and Anders Olafsson both failed to score a single point over the course of the season. Tetsuya Ota also escaped a scary crash at Fuji in the same year. He was lucky to have survived. Now, do you remember when Gran Turismo 2 was first released and there were all sorts of rumours about there being a McLaren F1 on the game? Well, it was largely down to the fact that whoever designed the US cover art for the game decided to put the dials in from the McLaren F1 road car right on there, despite there being no McLaren F1 on the game. Well, it turns out that there was a McLaren F1 planned to appear on Gran Turismo 2, but not the one we all think. The SOK McLaren GTR 99 exists as a text string on the Gran Turismo 2 demos, which was another entrant in JGTC in 1999, as its name suggests. The team's drivers were Hideki Okada and Yoji Yamada, who both scored 2 points each in the championship. To drive a McLaren F1 on a Gran Turismo game, we'd have to wait until Gran Turismo 4 Prologue, which was released in December 2003 in Japan and March 2004 elsewhere. Next we have the STP Taisan Porsche GT2 97, another car from GT300 class in JGTC, and also another car from the 1997 season of JGTC. In real life, the car was quite successful, with drivers Keiichi Suzuki and Morio Nita finishing second in the GT300 class, just 1 point behind the Bando team's Silvia RSR, driven by Hideo Fukuyama and Manabu Orido. It's another car that features on JGTC All Japan Grand Touring Car Championship for the PS1, so even though we never got to drive it on Gran Turismo 2, we can at least drive it over there. It's also present on Advan Racing, but it's actually licensed here as well, so go and give it a try on this game as well. The STP Taisan Porsche RSR 99 was also scheduled to be on Gran Turismo 2, evidenced by the corresponding text string once again. The car didn't perform quite as well as it did in 1997, but drivers Hideshi Matsuda and Dominic Schwager finished joint 8th in the GT300 Championship standings. Next on our hit list is the Kosei and Buddy Club MR2 98, with its corresponding text string on the Gran Turismo 2 demo discs. Now, if you've seen my video about the real-life racing cars that inspired a lot of Gran Turismo 1's racing modifications, you'll probably recognise the Buddy Club and Kosei MR2 as the inspiration for the Toyota MR2's racing modification, particularly the black colour scheme of the MR2G Limited. Sadly, both the MR2G Limited and MR2 GTS say the same colour schemes on Gran Turismo 2, and the black colour scheme was cut. Perhaps it was cut as the game designers were hoping to license the real thing, as evidenced by the text string on the demo. For whatever reason, it seems as though they were unable to license the real car, although they did manage to license the Kure and Zexal GTRs on Gran Turismo 2, for example, which originally inspired the racing modifications for the Nismo GTR LM on Gran Turismo 1. In real life, the car competed in GT300 in 1998, as its name suggests, with drivers Yasuhisa Fujiwara and Masahiro Matsunaga placing joint 18th in the GT300 Championship standings, with 15 points. The car was licensed on JGTC All Japan Grand Touring Cars on the PS1, so if you want to drive the real thing, you can do so on that game. There's also another unlicensed version on Advan Racing once again, which you can drive as well, against 14 other GT500 and GT300 opponents. Along the same lines as the Buddy Club MR2, we have the Fett Sports Supra 98. This was another car that inspired a racing modification from the original Gran Turismo, and that was the Toyota Supra, unsurprisingly. Again, it seems as though the game's creators wanted to license the real car, but sadly they were unable to do so, for reasons unknown. While the racing modification that was inspired by the Fett Sports Supra was present on many Supras on the original Gran Turismo, it wasn't as common on Gran Turismo 2. In fact, only the TRD 3000 GT retains this livery, with the rest of the Supras being treated to brand new designs. The other MR2 we need to discuss is the Tsuchiya MR2 98, another car which appears as a text string on the Gran Turismo 2 test drive demo disc. The Tsuchiya MR2 appeared in the 1998 season of JGTC, as its name suggests, and it was very successful, Drivers Keiichi Suzuki and Shingo Tachi won the GT300 Championship with 106 points, more than double of third place driver Manabu Arido. Although the actual car wouldn't be licensed on Gran Turismo 2, it became a racing modification for the MR2 GTS 98. Both the blue and silver colour schemes are present, which were both used during the 1998 JGTC season. You see, teams sometimes like to change their liveries halfway through the season, with the blue car being used for the first half and the silver car being used for the last half of the season. While the real car may not have been licensed, the racing modification is actually a very close approximation, meaning that you can take the car and place it back where it belongs in the GT300 Championship with its real-life opponents. If you did want to drive the real licensed car, it's another one that appears on JGTC All Japan Grand Touring Car Championship, but only the blue Tsuchiya MR2 is included. So if you want to drive the silver one, the MR2's racing modification is the way to go. There was also the HKS FF Drag Celica present in texturing only form on the test drive demo disc. Together with the Drag R33 Skyline and the Drag 180SX, this would have made it a trio of HKS drag cars on the game. Therefore, the HKS Celica is perhaps another leftover of the cut drag racing mode on Gran Turismo 2. In real life, the car's livery was very similar to the other HKS drag cars that were present on the game, so we had a pretty good idea of what it looked like. However, with no drag race mode to compete in, this car was perhaps cut because it had no real mode to race in. Although it does make you wonder why the Drag R33 GTR and the Drag 180SX were left in. The HKS FF Drag Celica was present on Option Tuning Car Battle Spec R, which was released in 2000 for the PS1, so if you wanted to drive it, you can do so on that game. The Drag R33 GTR also makes an appearance, although the Drag 180SX is nowhere to be seen. And the Drag R33 actually handles amazingly well. Its handling might be fictional, but it's great to finally enjoy driving this car. Well, that might have been the last texturing only car we needed to discuss today, but we're not quite done yet. There were other cut cars present in early car lists for the game, which were distributed by journalists and games magazines, some of which I don't actually have. However, the full list was compiled by the cutting room floor, so thanks guys, this means that we can still view this list online. First up is the Opel Astra rally car, which competed in the World Rally Championship between 1998 and 2001. On the final game, this car was relegated to the racing modification for the Astra, so it's still present, but unlicensed. As with all the Opel cars, there's also a Vauxhall version on the PAL version of the game, so presumably there would have been a Vauxhall Astra rally car too. Next is the Opel Vectra touring car, which was also downgraded to the racing modification for the standard Opel Vectra. Of course, there's the Vauxhall version on the PAL Gran Turismo 2 as well, although the second colour scheme was changed from dark green on the Opel model to purple on the Vauxhall model. However, it's the red and white colour scheme we're most interested in, and in fact, a photo of the real-life car even appears on the Vauxhall dealership. Yes, this is what the real-life Opel Vectra touring car would have looked like. It competed in the 1999 season of the British Touring Car Championship, with Ivan Muller finishing 6th in the driver's standings and John Cleland finishing 13th in his very last season of BTCC racing. The next car from these lists is the Renault Laguna touring car, which would have been once present on Gran Turismo 2, only for it to be downgraded to a racing modification like the cars above. The big difference here is that the majority of the real-life sponsors and decals have been removed, so what we're left with is quite a plain car here. If the real version had been licensed, it would have actually looked quite a bit different. It too took part in the 1999 season of the British Touring Car Championship, with Jason Plato finishing 5th and Jean-Christophe Bouillon finishing 10th in the Drivers' Championship. There was also a car from the 1997 or 1998 season of the BTCC that would have originally appeared on the game. The Audi A4 touring car would become the racing modification for the Audi A4 and Audi S4 on Gran Turismo 2. The one with the yellow wing mirrors was driven in real life by Frank Biela in 1997, where Biela finished 2nd in the championship. The version with red wing mirrors was driven by Ivan Muller in 1998, who finished 7th in the Drivers' Championship in his first season of BTCC. We would have also once had the Ford Mondeo touring car, which was likely based on the 1998 BTCC Mondeo, driven by Will Hoy, Craig Baird, and also by Nigel Mansell in 3 rounds of the championship. The car would be downgraded to a racing modification, but it's still pretty faithful to the actual car. The colour scheme with a red strip above the windscreen seems to be made for the game only. However, Mansell did race with the red number 55, so maybe it's a little nod to Big Nige. Although those were the only touring cars to be listed prior to the game's release, there were actually a few more that ended up as racing modifications. There was the Honda Accord touring car, which is inspired by the Accord that ran in the 1998 season of the British Touring Car Championship, and also the Nissan Primera from the 1998 and 1999 BTCC seasons. Laurent Aiello actually won the 1999 Drivers' Championship in this car. There's also the BMW 320 from 1996, driven by Joachim Winkelhock and Roberto Ravaglia to 5th and 6th in the championship. Just 4 last cars to discuss now. The first of these is another car that would be demoted to a racing modification on the final game. It's the Lister Storm GT, which in real life competed in the 1999 FIA GT Championship. It finished 5th in the Constructors' Championship, some way behind the dominant teams that ran Dodge Vipers. Next we have the Honda NSX-R GT2 LM95. This car will be familiar to Gran Turismo fans as it was present on Gran Turismo 1. However, for some reason, its existence on Gran Turismo 2 was a lot more turbulent. It was originally listed to appear as the fully licensed car. However, it was then downgraded to the racing modification for the Acura NSX93, only for it to be eventually cut entirely. Thankfully though, the model remains in the game's code, so we can use cheat codes to access it and bring it back to Gran Turismo 2. There was also the Mini Monte Carlo intended to appear on Gran Turismo 2, which was originally listed alongside the Mini 1275S Mark I, according to the cutting room floor. This rally-ready Mini would have probably looked somewhat similar to the 1275S Mark I, which did make it into the game. Perhaps it was ultimately deemed too similar to warrant a place. And lastly, we have the Nismo GTR R34 LM, which was listed alongside the Nismo GTR R33 LM and Nismo GTR R33 Road Car. In fact, the GTR R33 LM wouldn't even go on to exist as a standalone car like it did on Gran Turismo 1, but became the racing modification for the GTR R33 Road Car after its original racing modifications from GT1 were replaced with the real-life licensed cars which they were based on, the Zexel and Courier R33 GTRs. We're not really sure what this cut R34 LM would have looked like. Maybe it was one of the GTR R34s which did eventually get licensed, such as the Pennzoil GTR and the Calsonic GTR. Or maybe it was one of the R34 Skylines that was downgraded to a racing modification. We may never be sure. Okay guys, well that brings us to the end of the video. Thanks again to Super Fritzio and Submaniac93 for their contributions, and thank you for watching. See you next time.